Hey everybody, how you doing? Troy York here. How many times have you, as British people, ever heard the words "they hate us"? They hate us. Have you heard it? I've heard it a million times. You know, being an American, a British American, and I grew up for 30 years of my life in the UK, of course. Well, actually, not that many, maybe 25, 24, because I lived in Germany for a long time, and I emigrated to the United States. But I've been in the United States 38 years. United States and Mexico for 38 years. You know, so I always look from the outside, and people don't know who I am, so they will say things to me. I give you one example. It happened about 3 years ago. 4 years ago, actually, it was. I was on my way from here, Puerto Vallarta, where I live in Mexico, to Portugal, and I had to go via Manchester. And I was on the like I was waiting for the plane, and there's a massive line because it's a massive plane. Uh, TUI comes into Puerto Vallarta twice a week, carrying like 350 people, and it was a lot of people, and it was a big line. I was waiting in the line, and in front of me there was this guy standing there with his wife and kid, and we got chatting, and he said, "Where are you from?" I said, "Denver, Colorado." He says, "Oh, okay, that's great." He says, I said, I used to live in New York for a long time and I moved to Denver. And he goes, "Oh, great." He says, "Oh, I love America. Have you been to America? Where'd you go?" And he said, "Oh, I've never been. I just like it from movies." And I said, "Okay, it's different. When you live there, things are a little different." He said, "No, no, no." He says, "I'd love to live in America." I said, "Well, you should. You should maybe move." And I knew he had an accent. So I said, "Where'd you, he's I'm from Latvia and my wife's from Latvia. My son is English," he said. And he goes, "He's not really English. He's not that stupid." And I said, "What do you mean stupid?" He goes, "The English are very not too smart." "Oh, really? Okay, that's great." So he says, "I live in Keighley, which is in Yorkshire, or I think it was Yorkshire," he said. Keighley in Yorkshire. I said, "I've heard of it." I said, "They have a very good rugby team." He goes, "Yeah, that's all they have is rugby, nothing. The people are stupid." I said, "Oh, okay, that's great." And then we were all together, like by this coffee house. I'll never forget it. And I said, "It's not really fair. They're not really." He goes, "Yes, they are." He said, "Believe me, we lived there and we know." Because I was, "Oh, okay." And behind there was a guy who got very agitated and he was looking at me and looking at him. I said, "What's wrong?" He goes, and he looks at the guy and he went straight up and gave him an eyeball to eyeball. And he was actually a guy from Wales. He was from Cardiff, Wales, this guy. And he said, "What the?" And he said, like, "What do you say?" And I heard, "Hey," and I try to get in the middle of them because you cannot get in fights at airports. It's the worst place you could ever have a dispute is at an airport. If somebody directly insulted me, I would never respond because you can't retaliate for the simple reason at airports you just can't. That's the word, especially in Mexico. They put you in jail for like a month without you even seeing a lawyer. Honestly, you got to be very careful, especially in Mexico. So this guy from Cardiff gave an eyeball to eyeball, and we kind of like drew them apart. I grabbed the big guy, who was actually Latvian, and the Welsh guy was a shorter guy. He's probably like probably 5'10". And I said, "No, come on." He goes, "Tell him to keep his bit." I said, "Yeah, okay." He got very mad at this guy because he said it kind of loud. And the reason he said it loud, he's a little intoxicated, this guy from Latvia. And I knew that anyway. He was giving it too much mouth and it was too loud. And you didn't realize when you get drunk, you don't realize how loud your voice sounds. Well, anyway, there's a lot of haters, as I say, in, you know, Anglophobes. Okay, you can say there's a lot of haters who hate the English. They just don't like the English. They think Scotland, they're okay. The Welsh, nobody even ever mentions the Welsh. The Irish are cool, of course they are, but the English, no, they're not. They're not really cool. And as far as foreigners are concerned, they just don't like the English. And the thing is that most of the foreigners that are coming to England, they don't go to Wales or Scotland. They go directly to England, don't they? And they go and they get a dislike for the English. They just do. I think it's because the English tell them what to do in certain places. They don't like it. And it's as simple as that. And I was living in England up until I was 30 years old. Now, I'm telling you, it was like that even when I was living there. I used to work with a bunch of foreigners, actually. And there was always a little, they used to say anti-English things all the time. And you kind of like, okay. And it's kind of tongue in cheek, a lot of it. But sometimes you would get agitated. I got agitated with a couple of Italians when I worked in the West End of London. And it was going to be a bad scene. And they actually backed out of it. But I was like, I kind of lost it a little bit. That was one of the reasons I left the UK. I couldn't stand the riffs anymore. I was scared for myself, what might happen, and that's how I felt at the time. Everyone hates the English, even in England. I mean, that's just how I felt. And when I've ever met English people abroad in Spain, let's say, or Portugal when I went there, over the United States, people I've met, Canada, I've lived in many different countries. Um, and it's always the same. The English always say they hate us. In England, people who actually live in England, they hate us. Do they? Yes, they do. I kind of felt that when I was living there, but to be truthful, that's how it is, and that's how it is. I mean, they do not like the English. They don't, and it's just that simple. They think the English are lazy. That's one of their main things that they say. I don't think that's true at all. Not from what I've seen. The English that are in the United States work their butts off, because I know a lot of them. They're all very hard workers. So, including myself, let's say. But anyway, they say they're lazy. They have no family values. That's totally wrong for what I've seen, what I've seen. I'll tell you one thing about the English, but they're right in one way, and I'll tell you what that is. They're too tolerant, but the foreigners say they're not tolerant at all. They say, no, the whole thing is completely racist against us. The English are to blame. Well, I know the police are not racist, that's for sure. I mean, with the two-tier policing we've seen over the last 20, 30 years, I think you're completely wrong there. I mean, the cops nowadays, I mean, arresting mainly white people, and the people of color are moving away from the action, and the white people are getting, that's what I've been saying. And they have been, they've been awful, towards the white people. I've got to be honestly say that. But the people of color and foreigners in England do not like the English at all, in any way, shape, or form. It's just that you look at the stores. I mean, when I was a kid growing up, all the stores were English owned, almost all of them. Then it changed because foreigners came in and they wouldn't buy from the English stores. That's why they went out of business. That is actually what's going on. And also they were abusing English people openly in the street. And nowadays that is kind of like, yes, in mostly every single city, the English are getting abused. You can tell by the number of assaults. If you added up the number of assaults by foreigners on English people compared to the other way around, it would read about 50-1. I mean, basically that's how it is. There's anglophobia is a massive issue, and you can tell with the grooming gangs and with the way the police didn't respond. These people think the Brits or the English are idiots. They do. That's how they feel. They feel the English cops are absolutely useless. And I would say 1% of crimes are solved. Why? Because they will keep doing it over and over again because the English cops are absolutely useless, and they know that. They make fun of the English. All these people, like, you might think, well, Islamophobia, let's say. But to be honest with you, in their households, they make fun of the English non-stop. And so does every foreigner in London. It's a big joke in their own languages. They make fun of the English. The English are made fun of. Because I speak German fluently, and I was on a train one time in Belgium, and they started talking about the English Germans who had lived in England, actually in London, and they made fun. They thought the English were the most stupidest people they ever met in their life. That's how they felt. They were good for nothing, basically. And to be honest with you, that's the perception of foreigners living in the UK. And that's why things will never, and it's true. I mean, you can say whatever you like, you can make comments and say that's bullshit. It is not bullshit. I am telling you. They think the English are the most stupidest people. Who else would give away everything? The English have given away everything. England has been bought out, completely bought out. They have hotels in London that is not one English person working in there, in five-star hotels, not one, not a solitary English person. There's got to be a reason. The reason is once a foreigner gets into power and they take somewhere over, they only want foreigners in there. They will not employ English people. And that is an absolute fact. Who else? Who else but the English would give away benefits to 2 million people for nothing? Who? Who would do that? What country would do that? None. It wouldn't happen. It's impossible. In Germany, there's a 6 weeks rule, for benefits, 6 weeks. And then it will come after you and they will chastise you. That's how they are. The Germans are very, very thorough. There's a lot that the Brits could learn from the Germans. They're very, very, very thorough. And they go through everything. You don't just give away money for nothing. Not in Germany, they don't. And I'm just telling you, there is anglophobia. It's a massive, massive thing in the world, especially in England. And they're open about it. They're very open about it, honestly. It's just something I've noticed, what I've seen, what I've heard, what people have said. Massive anglophobia. If you want to keep it like that, don't vote Reform. Just keep voting Labour. Keep doing it. Conservatives are never going to get into power, so it doesn't matter. But keep voting Labour. Okay, if you don't want it changed. If you don't, the thing is, foreigners are getting British passports every week, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, and then Reform will never get into power. This is the last opportunity. I love all of you and just had to give you that honest assessment. Take care.